Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Phil Jimenez is an Eisner, Inkpot, Diamond, and Wizard Award-winning writer and artist who has worked for DC Entertainment, Marvel Entertainment, and a host of other comic book companies for nearly 30 years. He is best known for his work on Tempest, The Invisibles, New X-Men, Wonder Woman, Infinite Crisis, Amazing Spider-Man, and Wonder Woman Historia. It was great to welcome Phil back on the show, where we jump into politics and the complications of the political landscape. I appreciate this conversation because it also allowed me to articulate some facts and feelings about all of the recent controversy regarding education in Florida. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to learn from my guests, and Phil shared some fascinating views on politics as well as the evolution of language. Over the past several years of podcasting, I enjoy conversations with repeat guests because they have become friends and people who I respect greatly. Phil is certainly one of those humans. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. You can also just send me a gift on my registry, linked here on my website. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Phil. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, I'm back. It's been so long.
I know. It's been the phone tag, and then it was my hiatus of illness for 2 months that kept me away, and so many things. But
which is outrageous. Also, I'm a mess, as anyone that follows my work knows, and anyone that knows me. So I appreciate your patience immensely.
Oh, not at all. It's always like this, and I started this podcast to just basically talk to people I really like and want to hang out with. And you know how like life goes on and I haven't called so-and-so in so long. I'm like, you know what? I only get to talk to people if I podcast. So this is kind of my evil plot to just talk to my friends and people I like.
Which I love it. More information than your audience needs. So it's funny. My aunt and I have been like playing phone tag now for a couple of months.
Yeah.
And I finally texted her and said, what are you doing tomorrow? And we've been doing this back and forth. And I said, like, we need to schedule, because if we're just like, oh, let's get in touch with tomorrow, like it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And her grandchildren, her daughter and son-in-law and grandchildren live in Korea. So she just got back. And so I'm just like, okay, 4 p.m. today, like, because if we don't do it, it won't be till summer till we actually converse. So anyway, more information, but that's the world we live in.
It is. It's funny because today, as we record, not on our release date, but it's Groundhog's Day. So now I'm like, oh, this means Phil and I are going to literally be stuck in we're going to just be on this podcast forever now. I'm going to wake up. Like, hi, Phil. How are you?
I did not know that. This is the second, right? Of course.
Yes.
Oh, Lord. So more importantly, how are you feeling after 2 months of illness?
It is just like one thing after. Well, first of all, I'm allergic to Florida for more reasons than the pollen. A lot of the politics is part of the problem, but mainly the pollen is this thing, right? And so I just get these severe allergies, and if I have any immune system breakdown, that's it for me. Like, I am out for the count. And this is why I try so hard not to get sick, why I'm super like, everyone don't go near me, don't touch me kind of thing. But literally it just took me out. And I think it's just the stress of the year. I was just so tired and run down. You know how it goes. Mm-hmm. And then I got back, and then I went on a trip with my parents, and then my dad got COVID on the trip, and then he gave it to me.
No!
Yeah. And then I was like, oh my God, I just started to be able to breathe again. Luckily, COVID was kind of quick. And like, not to be a whiner on this podcast, but then it was Lunar New Year, and it's still ongoing for me. And our listeners kind of know, but with the Kung Fu School, we just do shows like from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. straight on the main day. And it's firecrackers. And so that dust kind of killed me again. And so I literally am now just getting over more sinus things again. So I might even still sound kind of nasally, and I've got my green tea here. So
you sound great to me. And I'm telling everyone this, you're wearing this amazing top. It's this is black and white. Like it's very cute. And I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but it's you look amazing.
Oh my gosh.
For someone who's been sick for 2 months.
Go on, please go on.
And the hair is particularly good right now.
My gosh.
Like it's really good.
This is a big deal coming from you, who, as Kelly Sue and I know, quite an eye for fashion.
And for hair. My friend Jack, who used to head business affairs at DC Comics, said, because I was really known for drawing Donna Troy's hair, and he goes, your company name should be It's All About the Hair.com. Right, which makes me laugh. Yes, very, very funny. Anyway, you look fabulous.
Gosh. Thank you so much, as do you always, and especially on your Instagram. I just can't stop putting enough like hot fire, emojis because woo, Bill.
Yeah, but you know what? It's funny. So I'm thirsty like the rest of us, and so if I'm not feeling really great, I'll be like snap. And I try to limit the number of pictures to like 10, right? Like, so I'm not spending hours shooting. And and it's almost always the first picture because I'm not really thinking about it. And then what's fascinating to me, the reason I'm telling you this story is I think a lot about what am I doing right now? What am I craving? What is this serving, right? So part of it's clearly I just, the low ebb of ego. I need a boost. I want to be validated for my body. I'm 52. I don't want to feel old. I want to feel competitive. I think a lot about what we do when we put images of ourselves out on Instagram, and I try not to do it too often. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's meant to be flirty to some very specific people. But I am concerned, I guess, at how someone like me, who's very influenced by image and imagery, puts that back in the world. I think about that a lot, and I'm clearly happy and pleased when I get 1,000 likes on a photograph, right? But I got 1,000 likes on a photograph that was cropped and lit right, and happened to be a good picture, as opposed to most of the other 9 that I took. Anyway, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been clearing out or trying to. I follow thousands of people on Instagram, mostly over the years, and I've been muting a lot of what I call body posts.
Yes.
Because I find they don't do me any good. Invariably, they are primarily men who are younger than me, whose business is fitness. Their business is to look good on Instagram. And even at this age, knowing better, I find myself feeling insecure and competitive. And so I've just been slowly but surely quieting a lot of that stimulus because I find it just doesn't do me any good.
Yeah, no, I love that you shared that because I always kind of had an adversity to social media because of all the things you just kind of mentioned. And it's ironic, right? Because I'm this martial artist, I'm very confident and all of this stuff, but it's just like, oh, no one liked my video today. That means they don't like me at all. Ooh,
yes.
And you're like, what the fuck? You're like, no, this is not even me. It puts you in this mindset that you don't want to be in, right? And I think about that with, how we always say as us older folks, oh, the kids these days, they don't know how hard it was. But I do have a lot of compassion for the youth where, when I would go into a grocery store and then I saw the magazine and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at that person. And then you have the self-esteem thing. I mean, they're just on a device 24/7 now and have that stimulus, right? And so it's like, what is that doing to our younger generation? Because it's a lot of negativity for sure.
So clearly my perspective is a hyper-focused and myopic lens. But I in recent years, I've befriended, I would say an interesting group of 30-something, primarily, let's say mostly gay white men. And one of the things that's really interesting about half of them is how remarkably comfortable they are or seem to be with their bodies, themselves, putting themselves out on social media in ways that stun me, that do not seem performative or manufactured. They're into it, right? They know. it is not to say that that doesn't affect their brains, but the adulation they get for being, say, handsome,
Right.
is something that they feed off of and like and put back out in the world in a way that I'm awed by, because I can't figure out if it is jealousy or envy, because I've never felt that way, or concern because is this what we should aggrandize in human beings, right? As our physical beauty. But it is amazing to see a swath of younger people who are quite comfortable with their bodies in whatever shape they're in.
Yeah.
Because these are not all fitness people. Some of them are, you know, big, heavy boys. And they're like, here I am in a Speedo. And I'm like, wow, that is so amazing to me.
And brave. Yeah. To me, I'm like, wow. Yeah.
Right. But to them, it's just sort of like, well, why not? Right. And I kind of love that at the same time. Right. So I find a lot of conflict. And I did you by any stretch happen to watch the Pam Anderson documentary that was just on Netflix?
No, I did not. It's not the Hulu, the Netflix.
Not the Hulu.
Not the Hulu. Yeah. Okay.
No. I think this was a response to the Hulu miniseries. It's her sons essentially interviewing her. It's about 90 minutes.
Oh, okay. No.
It's actually incredibly touching. I loved it. I came out of that. I didn't have a particular feeling about her. I loved her 1,000 times more than I did before I started watching it. But I bring this up because it echoed documentaries I've seen about, like, say, Britney Spears and Nicole Smith, about particularly, I'm going to say, blonde white bombshells in the 90s, but women who are highly sexualized and then probably I'm going to say allowed themselves to be sexualized as well. Like it's an interesting circle, but how we treated them in the 90s as opposed to, I feel like, how we would treat them now. Right.
Yes.
And it was very interesting because it was so, and not saying people aren't mean now, don't get me wrong, but I mean, like, it was those early internet days where the cruelty was just high. And there's an interesting collection of Pam Anderson clips where she's on these various talk shows and almost all the hosts are male, except for, I think she's on The View once. And the men are they're so obnoxious.
Yeah.
And it was comedy, right? Like, that was comedy. And you can even see her own discomfort in, like, I'm here to talk about PETA, for example, and they just want to talk about her breasts. And it's so, and at the time, people are just applauding, right? Like, it's just really fascinating. So anyway.
No, I think that is fascinating because it's really interesting that even, you know, like characters like that, like she's putting out a persona, she knows she's putting out a persona, but it doesn't really give people the right to be complete assholes, you know? And it's like, just because she's beautiful, it doesn't mean she's stupid. And it's kind of interesting that it suddenly gives them the right to think they have entitlement to touch her or like be gross. And I think that a lot of women feel that way as well. But like, just because you want to look pretty, and I'm sure men too, like just because you want to look nice doesn't entitle like everyone else to just be gross and just jerks, right?
There was, I had a really interesting talk with my young cousin, the youngest, I'm the oldest, he's the youngest, we're both gay. And so and we're a generation apart. And what was really interesting is we were talking about navigating gay bars, particularly, and how much he dislikes being touched in gay bars, and like, which is funny for me because gay bars, when I was growing up, was the place where you could touch people and you could flirt with them and put your hand on them or whatever without recrimination or fear.
Yeah.
Right. And now he's like, don't touch me. I didn't ask you to touch me. And I'm like, I kind of love knowing that just because I think it's important to know how we're evolving generationally. But it's so fascinating to me because I'm like, put your hand on my shoulder. I'm great with that. Right. But like, he's just like, no, it's my body. Leave it alone. So I'm just fascinated by, again, generational evolution and what we are used to and what is acceptable to some of us in certain spaces and what is no longer acceptable.
Yeah. And this is the importance of like learning as we get older and understanding. And thank you for connecting me with Sasha Coward, because he actually shared so much about even just the word queer, right? And how generationally this could mean this to one person and they're embracing it in this generation. And I was like, oh my goodness, I felt like I was in the proper school at that point. Like just the thought of it, right? Like just even a word that just kind of like embodies so much for so many people in different ways. So yes, generationally, I feel like, oh, wow. I especially, kind of age that we're kind of at, you're not like ancient where you're like, oh, back in the, whatever, but then you still feel, I'm like, we're young, where my husband and I were always like with the kids, like, yeah, we're young, we're hip. And then, they don't get any of our references to the 80s movies or 90s. And you're just like, all. And one of my kids said, oh, you were born in the 1900s. I was like, okay, that does it. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, to think about it that way, right? Like a different century.
Wow. A friend of mine likes to roll his eyes at all my bad dad jokes. I'm like, these are actually funny. But they're just not ever taken well. You just sparked something. Oh, but it goes to the word queer and language.
Yes.
But also the internet and learning and things like that. So on Twitter recently, I was responding. My social media life has changed a lot in the past couple of years post Donald Trump, right? And I'm happy for it, because I really think the 4 or 5 years I was on social media and engaged in that larger conversation, I think really did bad things to my brain. And so the past couple of years has been a lot of decompressing.
Right.
That said, so I'd hopped on Twitter for some reason, because once upon a time it had been a valuable news source before Musk kind of took it over. And there was discussion about this last episode of The Last of Us, which I don't know if you watch.
I haven't seen it, but I do know of it.
Yeah. So an acquaintance of mine, Murray Bartlett, the now Emmy Award-winning actor, he was on it. I was really excited for him. And I was reading a critic's, a queer critic was going sort of off on what he didn't like about it. And there will be no spoilers, except for the way he used queer was very interesting to me, because it was a highly narrow definition of the word. And I use the word really broadly. And so there's a couple points of the story. So I retorted and did a follow-up. And it was very interesting, the sort of pile on either way. Lots of support, lots of not support.
Opposition, yeah.
Many positions from many different kinds of people, assuming they're real and not bots. I have no idea. But but also going back to social media, if Twitter's accurate, it got something like 57,000 views.
Wow.
And it just made me think of, I'm not sure what that was about, except for what we put out in the world, social media, et cetera. It's been on my mind a lot lately. Its potential reach. So even someone just sort of swiping through and reading that, that's now in their brain. So it makes me think a lot about the responsibility we have about putting out good and just information. And even when I get snarky about DeSantis this morning on Twitter, I'm like, is this doing anyone any good? I don't really know, but it felt good. I'm putting negative energy out in the world, et cetera. But going back to language, it just made me think about, and we might have talked about this last time, shared vocabulary and how difficult discourse is without shared definitions of a word.
Yes.
And even generationally, right? If I may, and this gets, forgive me. So one of the things that's been really, really interesting to me are, I'm going to say lady words, like curse words, which are so common among gays, but the discourse has been so interesting to me about in the past 15 years about what words can be used and what not. And there was a comedian, a woman who was just like, gays can use this word because I know it means comes from affection. A straight dude who calls me this is like, no, you can't, motherfucker. You back up. And even those rules, those rules of engagement, how it can use, it's just so I remain fascinated by it. And I love it. I actually love that because it's so exciting to me, the evolution of language, but it's a lot.
Yeah. And this is where, though, I am not great with Twitter and Instagram. I'm not great with social media in general, but like I need context and I need voice. I need to hear the emotion. I need to hear, the implication. So I am really careful when I email people now because I realize like I used to just email back like, yeah, okay, good. And they were like, why are you so rude? You only sent me 3 words, And I'm like, because I'm busy, I mean, back then I used it as texting, I guess, what would be completely acceptable in a text message. So I'm so careful. But like, I feel like those words, right? Like you throw around the C word or the whatever, like, there's certain words you just don't say, right? In terms of like racial slurs and things like that. But like, I feel like if it's said with affection, then it's usually not offensive. And if the person's saying it to you, like it's all context really. But I feel like I can't read anything and guess. I have to know like how is it being said? Where was the comma? Where was the emphasis? And I think that makes all the difference. So then it's like, it's interesting because like words matter, but like I think less so than how you say the words that, that matters even more because, and there's this like acting exercise where you just take a sentence like, oh, look at your shirt. Oh, look at your shirt.
Yes.
Oh, look at your shirt, like, and so which one is it? If you're just reading on Twitter, it's like, I don't know these people. I'm not sure what to, it's just, and I don't get caught up in the scroll or anything anyway, but yeah, I think language is super important and interesting and the changes of the definitions of things over time and generationally, but also even within subcultures, like you're saying, like, it's fascinating to me. I'm with you there. I'm always trying to catch up. I feel like I'm always like 2 steps behind everyone.
I would not guess that knowing you. So I actually feel like you're on top of a lot. Yeah, but I've been thinking about this a lot, and again, reclamation of language, but also. So you were talking about context and the hearing things, which what was, oh gosh, I'm going to lose the thought and I don't want to waste time on it. But I was thinking about, I know. So friends and I, I'm part of a writing group, and we talk a lot about language, right? And what things sound like. And we got into an interesting conversation about facts versus the truth and about narrative when delivering news stories or documentaries. And because like you can list a series of facts, kind of like what you said, the person said her shirt looks great, but that gives you nothing, right? So that is a fact. That person said that, but we don't know how it was said, with what tone, without further supplementation, right? Like, so my friend was saying like that's how the news should be delivered, just a series of facts, like without story. And I'm like, but part of it is the context is what makes those facts matter, right? Like that's how we absorb them and see like, sure, like just the example you gave, like he said she had a nice shirt, but we know what he really means because we know him, we know her, we know that relationship, and especially if there's an imagery, we saw the shirt, So I've been thinking a lot about that as well, about, yes, I'm using the expression again, a listing of facts versus sort of the overall truth of the matter. And why what you said is, I think, just vitally important, like, and how context is everything.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the news specifically because, like, for example, my husband, Oscar, he doesn't like to listen or we don't watch the news ever. Like we haven't had cable in like 15 years. It's been a long time. So we don't watch it ever. We do on occasion listen to like a 10-minute blurb podcast thing, but he prefers even just getting that Axios newsletter, which is like, here's the one important thing you need, blah, blah, blah. And it's, even so, you're still in your mind putting in your truth and you're like, oh, I agree with this. So therefore you it's just, you start to have that tendency, right, to just kind of confirmation bias thing. But it is hard to just digest the facts, especially living here in Florida where you get DeSantis and there's this and this and this. And it's really hard because I'm working in legislation now, and I am faced with a daily obstacle of working with people that I know I have opposing views with on almost everything else, but I have to focus in on this one thing if I want it to move forward, because this is the government we have. And it's like, do I do that, or do I just go, oh, forget it, don't do anything, right? Like, but it's like, here are the facts, and I got to try to stick within that, and it's just not even go out of that lane, and it's really challenging. It's really challenging.
I wanted to ask you something, because of course I'm sort of seething about the College Board, and then sort of seemingly caving to DeSantis, and the guy that runs the College Board doing this sort of the PR tour. I saw him on CBS this morning and was just kind of appalled by how disingenuous he sounded. And again, like, if you were to look at his language, perfect. If you were to hear him talking to Gayle King, I'm like, he sounds like he's lying. He's performing. And I know that because I've done the same thing, right? Like, I know what that rehearsed language is because I've had to do it over the years. And so I don't know if other people hear it the same way, clearly. But my question was, you're working in legislation, you're in Florida. For someone who's not in Florida, I'm trying to get a gauge of that state, right? I know I have friends who live there for whom DeSantis was really popular, primarily because of his COVID policies. Because he lowered restrictions, and I have friends that were able to. Yes, and so I have a friend. We've had arguments about he was able to work and support his son, and he's like, I don't want DeSantis to be president, but I would not have been able to support my son if those mask policies were in place. So I'm like, but all these people died in your state, and he's like, listen, dude, I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, two things are true at once.
Yes.
But I can't get a sense of. So the him attacking school curriculums as aggressively as he is, does that play to the entirety of the state, or just the sort of his base? Do you have a sense of that?
Oh, yeah. So it's a really good question. And so to start with, I don't actually believe that the elected officials, especially DeSantis, even though he won by astronomical numbers, represents Floridians. The first thing out of the gate is there was significant gerrymandering that passed a couple of years ago. And that, if you look at the maps, which I have to do every day when I go to talk to a representative in a district, I'm like, oh, that's really drawn weird. And it doesn't make any sense because it's part of this county, but part of this county. And it's very deliberate. So I do believe that if maybe we took that, in Brazil, everybody has to vote. Everybody has to vote. I believe if everybody had to vote in this country, as well as the state, we'd be in a really different environment in terms of government, right? So that's the first fact. So in terms of Florida, I'm like the Austin of Texas in Orlando, right? So I feel like I'm in a bit of an oasis of like-minded people around me in particular. But even so, even at my school, I know there are people that have opposing views, very conservative. And what we, and I say we, because Oscar and I have these conversations daily since 2016, had to have our conversations with ourselves about is we need to start looking at people as the people we know and not the views they believe in necessarily or think they believe in, because it's are you a good person? Let's just start there. So we just try to really filter that out, first of all. And that's been helpful because otherwise it'd be really hard to manage because everybody has a reason for what they're doing. But ultimately everyone wants health for their family, love, connectivity. Everybody actually does want the same thing. In terms of the education part, it's very complex. So he passed some really bad laws in the last few years. I was actually at the hearing for the anti-CRT law, which is now the Stop Woke Act or whatever. I was there. I heard it all. And the way it sounds in legislation doesn't sound bad. Oh, this makes sense. When you go to vote and you get all the electoral stuff, it doesn't make any sense. You have to get someone to interpret it really. But basically because of that law, which I am not a law expert, everybody. I am not a legislative expert. I am an advocate who's been doing work and happened to learn things along the way. So this is also my speculation and opinion. But like, so that law has like a bunch of things in it that says, okay, if you make someone feel guilty or bad about something in the classroom, that's, you know, et cetera, then that's not allowed to be taught. And so if that is violated, you know, if that happens, then it's quote unquote illegal. In the state of Florida, the legislation reads that it is required to teach Holocaust studies, African American studies, Hispanic heritage, and women's contributions. So those are things that are already required in K through 12 curriculum. So we're talking like elementary, middle school, high school. That's required already. So what I'm currently working on is including Asian American Pacific Islander history in that little line. It's literally 3 sentences to just add to that what's there. So the recent law that the recent, you know, ban on the AP African American history course, whether I agree with it or not, which of course I believe all of the history needs to be taught. I believe all of it needs to be shared. And then you can take from it what you want, right? Like this is education. Education should be a place where we start to think on our own. We get information and then we have free thought. And then when we dissect it, we have conversation. That's how learning happens, right? And so when you take away things that educate, then we're like counter educating. So it is a specific AP course. I am not versed in college credits or the new college or anything. I don't actually know a lot about it. So I can't speak to it very, you know, cognitively. I don't have expertise in it, but because in that course in particular, it hits up some of those lines from that Stop Woke Act where it's like, oh, you know, you're putting in Black Lives Matter and that's going to make people feel bad or it's controversial, you know, and, you know, I've supported Black Lives Matter on many occasions, still do. And so it doesn't really matter what I think, but when you see like, okay, that's why this has been a big deal. But the controversy, of course, is one, should it be taught? And that's an opinion for so many people to kind of have on their own. But the second is, African American history is taught and it's not banned in the state. And so that being spread is inaccurate, as much as I don't want to give, you know, anybody credit for doing the right thing here. You know, it is taught and it is required. So saying that it's been banned totally is completely false, but also they are banning a course that should and could be taught, right? So it's like 2 separate things, but they get mushed in together. I don't know if that answers your question, and that was really lengthy.
No, I actually love that clarification. My takeaway from the couple of news reports was that primarily what was that teachers are now confused about what they can teach
100%.
because if the threshold is someone's discomfort, right? Like how do you measure that on any honest level? Like how does a student,
which is why the law was ridiculous.
Yes, right. Like I'm uncomfortable, I feel oppressed, and then you have to take it on face value, right? What I was more interested in, what you were talking about, because you were talking about your pocket of Orlando, and I think you did answer it, was for people outside of Florida who only see these news clips or read, you know, on Axios or The Guardian, these stories primarily about DeSantis and policy. And because DeSantis did win by such a large margin, like what do Floridians generally think of this? Like I've had my gay friends in like Fort Lauderdale come at me and be like, listen, we don't all agree with this. You know, stop banging on Florida. I'm like, well, listen, I'm not saying that you agree with it, but clearly you live in a state that voted this guy in, right? So, but even hearing you talk about gerrymandering, I'm like, oh, of course, that's something I forget about.
It was huge. It was huge here. All the districts got remapped. So the landslide win, I don't believe would have been as great. Now, I do think we have still turned into a red state. I think that the Republicans did a really, really good job of getting that Hispanic vote, the the anti-communism fears, and bringing about, you know, and also, to be fair, because I try to be like, okay, I'm not a one-sided person. Like the Democrats haven't done enough to say like, here's what I'm going to do. And then it's done. Like, oh, they've been promising. But it's also like, if you've even sat into one government meeting, you're like, nothing's ever going to get done. This is ridiculous. So nobody can get anything done because it's just undermining each other all the time. So it's this broken machine that we're just trying to like fix as we go, get by. Right. And so there's so many issues. And I feel like though, there's very few people that I interact with that I think, wow, this is a horrible person and they just want to shoot me all the time and they don't believe in education. Like those people aren't really there, and unfortunately, I think in media, we're always hearing the loudest voices, which is the left and the right, which is not the majority, right? Like those are the loudest voices that come through. The ones that are super complaining all the way on the left and all the way on the right. And they're the loudest voices, but I don't think that really usually represents the majority of people.
What's interesting about that is, so I have grown more skeptical of that, primarily, and this is my left-wing bias, and I'm actually, the funny thing is, I'm not a big fan of Democrats, for example. I'm not a big fan of political systems because I think they just corrupt the parties, right? So I'm not saying like, I'm not necessarily, this is not a pro-Democrat thing, but if 70 or 80 million people voted for, say, Donald Trump, second time around, I question their goodness inherently.
Yes, I understand.
Because, right, and so that may be my own personal human failing about not giving enough credit. But there was I didn't read the entire article, but I think it was on The Atlantic, where they were talking about, we now live in a political system as well that's just about winning, right? Like, where it's almost not even about the personalities. It's about making sure your party remains in power. Like, it's about political calculus.
Yes.
Like, if we lose this seat, we lose the House. So we have to vote for George Santos, who's a lying sack of shit, because if we don't, we lose the House, right? So like,
I'm with you.
What's really interesting to me is that transformation of politics and what that does. But I've grown more cynical over time, and I'm not saying that's a good thing, particularly watching elections. Like, we continue to vote for really bad people because we're worried about winning. And I guess because in the big scheme, if you do your political calculus, you realize if this group wins, these policies will be enacted. If this group wins, these policies will be enacted. And that's, I think, where I think for me, that's where the breakdown comes down. I don't see how we recover from that.
Yeah.
Because as those policies get enacted and entrenched, then we are buttressed more to fight. I believe it was the last election. Like 2/3 of the country voted. It was not a small out.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's, I think, what it's just like, wow, like all those millions of people voted for the orange dude. Like, that's amazing. Like, that's really amazing to me. And so, of course, what I wanted to say was, is it because you really love him or you're just so afraid of the blue dude getting in?
I mean, both can. I think it might not even be that. I think it's some people vote on the one issue. Abortion's the big one, right? And that's all they care about. So I hear so many people, well, I don't like him, but, and I'm like, you know what? And I think what's happened to me now in the last year and a half of working in this legislation, because I have to compartmentalize so much, and because I live in a state where I'm in an oasis, but I also know, and everyone's been so respectful of me that they come into my world knowing, I mean, I'm really vocal, right? Like knowing what I feel. I'm like at the abortion rally, like, advocating for abortion access. They know who I am, and I know they don't agree, but they come into my space and they're respectful of me. And if they can do that, where I may disagree, but they actually think it is what it is, like they're able to kind of get through that, to have that respect. And I feel I at least owe not hating the other side, or I feel like I have to take a step back. And also, Greg Rucka and I have had 50 conversations on this. He can kind of be opinionated on politics. And I mean, I told him, in the midst of the pandemic, I was like, I don't like who I've become. Like, I'm wishing people have heart attacks. I want them to die. And I was like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to have this anger and hate. But you're right. the reason that I started to become more vocal, because I was like, this is not politics. This is a moral and ethical compass. And I'm like,
Yes.
okay, if you decide you're going to choose that, then you are morally and ethically not in my world. Like, you don't agree with me. And it's hard for me to like see eye to eye. But at the same time, being in a state like this where I know really good people who I know how they voted, right? I know. And it's like, am I going to discriminate because of that? Right. Like, so then I get all in my head clearly. And so it's really challenging, right? It's really challenging.
But I think that's actually also on that. Like, so it's that kind of consideration, I think, is also really important. I have two quick thoughts about this. One, going back to the internet discussion I was having, and this some fan, I think it was a fan, you never know on social media if it's a real person or not, but he was just like, so if I don't agree with you 100% on politics, I can't be your fan, which I hate. It's such a false argument, because I'm like, well, what don't you agree with? He was responding to my DeSantis comment and he wouldn't answer. I'm assuming it's a he if it's a real person. I have no idea, because it was a male sounding name. But and he's just like, well, look, I'm just reading your comics, but I just need to know if I'm welcome. And it made me crazy, because I'm just thinking, engage with me, right? Rather than this, like, if I don't agree with you 100%. So I said, what in my comment don't you agree with? And the poster never responded. It was more this bigger thing about, so we can't agree to disagree. Like, I can't, which makes me crazy. This leads to a second conversation I had, and I find I have this conversation more with, I would say, like-minded people about their own friends and relatives who are more conservative. So dear friend of mine, her husband is one of the loveliest guys I've ever known, white straight guy, sweet, like just one of the best people I've ever known. I'm Christian, and I bring this up simply because, in the very best possible way, like, he literally volunteers with his church every Saturday to provide resources and food for folks who are housing insecure. And I'm like, I've never been that good. I yell and scream a lot, but like Saturday mornings, I'm at the gym, right? Like, I'm not that giving of a person. But we got in this engagement about, he has many friends, hyper conservatives in Ohio, who are very good to his family, and he refuses to believe they're bad people, but he knows they voted for Donald Trump twice, for example. And he said, what I think is really important is we can't stop communicating. And I said, I'm not sure he's like, we have to continue to have these conversations. And I was like, what conversation are we not having? We know how we feel about things, meaning his New York friends versus his Ohio friends. There's no confusion about our points of view. The harder part is we don't agree. And we take those disagreements to the voting booth. We vote for policy based on those disagreements. So I said, I think we need to, that's the next discussion, is not like talking until one of us yields and see, like, I know how they feel about abortion. They know how I feel about abortion. That's not the confusion. That's not the conflict. It's that we're entrenched and in our points of view for probably moral and ethical reasons. So then what? Then like, what do we do with that discussion? And he's like, well, he's just like, we just have to be rational. We can't sort of yell. And this was right post Roe. And I was just like, my friend, like, yelling, being angry is a perfectly rational response to what just happened. Like, what you want is people to turn the volume. You don't want rational discussion. You want people to turn the volume down because it makes you uncomfortable. Yes. Like, raised voices makes you uncomfortable. Because you don't know what to do with anger. And as someone who also has issues with anger, it's not great. Like, I get it, but I'm like, your wife, if she was going, I'm giving a lot of information away, but if she was, if you're going to have children, right? Like, she has less body autonomy than you do now, right? Like, and he goes, And so we went back and forth. And I said, I could have a perfectly rational discussion with where my voice never raises with your friends talking about how despicable this is. Would that still count as conversation? Right? Like, and he's just like, oh, I don't know. We just can't stop talking to each other. Like, no good comes from that. And I find I've grown exhausted with my, I'm going to say, lefty friends who continue to sort of want to straddle that line between, well, we just have to keep talking. We can't let the communication break down. And my sense that we are beyond that. Now we need strategies to tackle what happens when we know that like politicians or we're going after Roe. We knew that. That was not a surprise. Mm-hmm. And to pretend otherwise, or to constantly say, well, they're really good people. They just feel differently than us. Okay, I sure, but they still want this thing to happen, which is going to have huge ramifications. Yeah. How do we deal with that?
Yeah. Oh, so many things you have me wanting to talk about. Wow.
Please.
You know what's fantastic is like, I was like, I'm talking to Phil this morning and I'm just going to write down like 2 things, like ask him this and we'll be good. After my first conversation with you, I wish I could show you all my show notes where it's like conversation 1, first time ever. Okay. Tell me about comics. When did you get, it's like all these like formal questions. And then once I've had you on the show a few times, like Greg Ruck is like, I just have his name and the number of the episode. So I remember it. And then it's like, there's no notes. It's just like, let's just go. Like, it's awesome. I love this. Okay. So a few things. One is, and by no means am I an expert on any of this stuff, but tribalism is where we're at with all of that, right? So people are just entrenched in their sides, are going to pick their side no matter what. And then that's it. And it's, you can't convince anyone, right? So on one end, I've been saying all this stuff about trying to coexist and everything. And I think I refer to it, especially in my Kung Fu space, like the temple, people that come to the temple. Like I took a hard stance against COVID. I was like, do not show up here without a mask in the 90-degree weather, outside training in distance. Everyone had literally an X to stand on that was distanced at my school. Like it's in my walls. Like, I'm like, this is Walum world. This zip code is not Florida. This is my city. Yeah. This is how you will be if you want to come and train. I mean, we have an outdoor facility. It's like all open air. And I still made everybody do all of these things. Because in the beginning, you don't know, like, so what is the harm of being safe? We're a little uncomfortable. You know what? It's kind of good for us in our, first world problem to be a little bit uncomfortable. Like we're also doing Kung Fu. It's hard. It's supposed to be hard. So this is part of it. So, but this is what I mean. No opposition. The few people that didn't want to come just didn't show up. But like I had full class. Like it was just, I liked the fact that I had so much respect for what I was doing, even if they disagreed. Like people that I know wear a mask nowhere else in their realm, and they would wear it at my school. Even long after like masking was like, off and everything. And, we make changes. We changes things as the information comes in. We can't do the hindsight thing because, of course, we all have an opinion now. Like, oh, well, and everything changes, right? So the second thing is I talked to a really good friend of mine, Dan John. He's a coach. He's a scholar. And he always says this quote, where it's like, I'm a really good person that has done bad things. I'm a really bad person that has done good things.
Yes.
And it's like, oh my gosh, yes, right? Because if we always think, we're doing the right thing, and we always do, good intentions, most people don't have bad intentions, right? And so it's just like having that at top of mind all the time. But the last point is activism and advocacy. So yes, I agree with you. Having these like conversations that are going to go nowhere is useless, which is why I am action oriented. And my husband and I actually talked about this just last night, which is, activism and advocacy. They're 2 different things. And I think they are both necessary. And activism is great, which is posting things, going out to rallies, being involved in kind of making your voice heard. But advocacy is really freaking hard work. Like that is where this is like, I have an extra 40-hour a week job that I don't get paid for right now. And that is taking up a lot of my time on top of my life, right? And that's advocacy, where you're like, okay, we're in the trench and I'm going to spend my own money to go to Tallahassee and go talk to these people and I'll do all this stuff. But that is the only way things get done. So you do have to fight back, but you have to find what way works for you, right? So you're right. We're past, well, we knew they were coming for Roe v. Wade. That, we didn't do a good enough job of curbing that. They had a really great 30-year plan and they implemented it. I mean, they were strategic and persistent. Yeah. And now we have to be on the defense, but we can also be strategic and persistent. And yes, showing up matters, going to these things. But I think if people really want to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, they can do that. You can donate. There's so many ways, right? You can donate, you can volunteer, you can repost stuff. Everybody can do their bite-sized way. I don't think like everyone needs to put 40 hours a week in like I am, because not everyone's crazy. But we can take action, and I feel like people feel they don't have power. And it's our job to take that power.
I don't remember if I brought up or mentioned the author and scholar named Ramsey Fawaz. Have I mentioned him to you?
Not that
so
I recall.
He is easily top 2 or 3 most brilliant people I've ever met. I'm going to connect you via email. He teaches at University of Madison, Wisconsin. He's a queer and feminist scholar and happens to be a comics scholar. So he can talk queer politics, feminist politics, intersection of both, and he can talk comics left, right.
Yes, please.
He is actually one of the most incredible people I know. I think he just turned 39. It's just like
annoying.
He's appallingly smart, and joyful, and he's just so vibrant. Like I could listen to him talk for hours. Anyway, yeah. I would encourage you to have him on the show because in his book Queer Forms, on the lecture circuit, he talked a lot. He talks a lot about modern day identity politics and where they come from, and sort of the mire that we're in. The sort of root system, he believes, of right and left sort of entrenchment, which is ultimately rooted in this feeling of helplessness, like nothing's ever going to change, or things are changing so fast it will never be the same, kind of mirrors of each other. But he, oh my gosh, he just had this very, I know. So he talked about, I'm going to use a word, this is not his language, safe spaces for friendship, okay. Right? Like that you need to have your living room, like the idea of having a salon is great and having people engage politically is great. But you know what? You need to have a place where friends can just be friends.
Yes.
And that's something that's gotten lost in these past several years because everything is politicized and actually does have weight. Like our choices clearly, like our policy and voting choices matter. The way we navigate through the world matters.
Yeah.
But he was talking about, I'm going to paraphrase, I'm probably going to get it wrong. That's why you need to have him on your show. He was talking about queer and feminist activists in the 70s and 80s. This may well have been pre-AIDS, and where they intersected and where they divided. And where they intersected, they were spot on, and where they divided was fairly hardcore. But he said wonderful friendships and unions were made among these activists because of their ability to sort of divvy up their lives. And it was a little bit of compartmentalizing, exactly as you're describing. Like, in this living room, we're just going to hang out and watch whatever's on TV, and when we're out in the streets, we will take our sides and be activists. And he was just talking about that getting lost, and particularly even among those groups who had such, in many ways, shared values, but then they parted ways. And he said they just kept going. What happened? They were so in unison, and then kind of went two opposite directions. Again, terrible paraphrasing. He is. I will connect you by email.
Fantastic. Yes, please.
He's delightful, and can talk about anything 1,000 times better than I could.
No, I think we're doing quite well. I mean, we haven't talked about comics at all, which, some of our listeners was like, "Oh, she's having Phil Jimenez." And I'm sure you guys are going to talk about, drawing and Wonder Woman and art and all of that. I'm like, if actually that's not true, our listeners know, like Greg Rook and I, like we just go on, and this is kind of this is your space where you get to talk about things that you want to talk about as well, right? It's not always the same stuff, but I do want to bring up Zest World, and so that we can kind of learn a little bit about that. And I wanted to officially, like, we texted that same night and that same day after you won the Eisner, and
yes.
I haven't talked to you in person actually since then, because we didn't schedule it. I loved your speech. And I absolutely was just like, I mean, I knew you guys were going to win, but like, wow, congratulations officially.
Thank you very, very much. I would be lying if I said I didn't want those awards. That sounds terrible, but I absolutely wanted them, and I was really thrilled. I was thrilled that clearly I got the best artist. That was great. Because that book was, such a tribute to George Perez and my mentors. But the fact that the whole team got best single issue, that project wouldn't exist without Kelly Sue. I was talking to her about this yesterday. And just the support system that we had with editors and letters and our colorists, who I drove to insanity, we all got it, right? So that was really exciting. Like, that recognition meant the world.
Yeah.
Because I think what we did was pretty great. Like, and it's weird to say that so soon after creating something. I don't know if you're like this, but it takes me years of distance to look at something with any objective eye and be like, oh, that was good. Like, oh, that's terrible.
I can feel that.
Yeah, I felt like what we did was great. And I'm really, really excited that the later issues of Historia of this first volume, Kelly Sue's getting the recognition, and the other artists are getting the recognition. Like, what she's done, I think, for Wonder Woman and that universe is sort of transformative. Like, it's just 100%. Such a profound point of view. And going back to dialogue and sort of queer and feminist theory intersecting, I was concerned in the beginning because we had slightly different ideas, quite frankly, about Amazon culture, and mine were sort of rooted in, I think, kind of queer ideology. Hers were rooted in sort of feminist ideology. And there was a really interesting discussion about feminism and war and what that meant. And I did a lot of research on that for a project that Ramsey had created. He created a guide called Keywords for Comic Scholarship, which is the first of its kind, so that universities everywhere have a shared vocabulary, so that when they're teaching comics, when we talk about panel gutters or Superman, we're all talking about the same thing. So I got to write the Wonder Woman section, which was a very interesting, to me, discussion about. I always say that the couple of things that Wonder Woman are inherently about are sex and gender and war and feminism, and the intersections of those things. And it's why I think she's a remarkably wonderful and complicated character, because those ideas about those things evolve. So does she, right? She's not static. And, we've seen her have real highs and real lows in her publication run over the past 70 years. Anyway, Kelly Sue totally brought me over to her side. That's where conversation and dialogue matters, and being open-minded. Like, I'm like, I totally get it. Pardon me, particularly in the context of Donald Trump's presidency. It was really interesting working on Historia in this sort of larger political context. But I was thrilled that I was very, very happy with those awards, because we worked really, really hard on that project. And again, that the whole team got at least that best single issue was great, because I really wanted Kelly Sue to get acknowledged. So thank you for that.
Oh, more than well deserved. I mean, it was just, and I love comics, and there's a lot of them that is exactly what it is to bring you joy and entertainment and everything. But that what you all did and continue to do, it is a game changer. And like you said, it's just the viewpoints, and it's the type of read that you definitely have to keep going back through and just like giving it a moment to sit and digest, and even visually, especially visually. It's so incredible, and so like beyond well deserved. But plus I love you guys both, so I mean, a little biased on this side.
Thank you. I also like to give shout outs to DC, because they let me work on it the amount of time it required, right? Like, because everyone knows I'm not fast. We'll talk about that with Westworld, but like, it was also that work demanded because it was going to be the basis for what could potentially be 9 subsequent issues.
Yeah.
Like that was, as Kelly Sue described, our pact with the audience. Like this is the foundation for it. And so DC was kind enough to let me do that. And of course we had our quarrels in the beginning because they're like, get it done. I'm like, listen, you can take me off of it. I totally get it. Or you can just let me do it. And they ultimately let me do it with enormous editorial support. Like they were really terrific. And DC, I think, gets a lot of, they get a bad rap. And I've certainly complained about them over the years because of business decisions, right? But editorially, they were utterly supportive, like just extraordinary. So really, really lovely. Yeah.
Awesome. And talk to me about Zestworld.
So real quick, so Zestworld, I recommend everyone go. It's a new subscription-based comic book platform. I have a comic there called Wildfire. Only a couple chapters are out. I moved while I was releasing the book. Some huge life changes. So I'm very, very behind. We're getting right back on schedule. But basically, it's emailer comics. You can go and you can get them for free on the website, or you can get them delivered to you by subscription. Some really amazing talent currently, like Dave Marquez and Joel Jones has this gorgeous book on there. Jim Food, me. Again, I'm catching up. They've also been very, very kind in letting me sort of realign my life and sort of get back on track. But they're weekly comics, almost like weekly chapters. So you get little chunks of story once a week or once every 2 weeks, and then an emailer with text in between. And it's zestworld.com. I recommend it. The guy that sort of founded it, Chris Giliberti, is amazing, really thoughtful about creators and trying to give them the best possible forum to create new material.
Nice. Very nice. Well, I mean, we always look forward to new works by you and kind of catching up with that. And I don't think you're alone in the I'm falling behind a bit, or I'm not. You know, I think we're in such a deadline world that, art is. I mean, you can't rush the artist, right? Isn't that the old saying? Like, can't rush art. But
I do think about the stuff that I read in the 80s, some of which was like on time every month, which blows my mind. And then other people forget like that the last issue of Watchmen was a year late, or that Sandman, there were months between issues, right? And I'm not saying that
to justify... And then 20 years before overtures.
Right. And I'm not saying that to justify my bad work. I'm a highly undisciplined worker. I admit it. And I talk to my students about doing exactly the opposite, like working from a place of discipline, because it's our jobs, right? It's not fun. It's our jobs. And I have gotten away with it for a really long time. I think it's the work ultimately will speak for itself, because it's elevated, but that doesn't mean it's a just or right way to perform, to work. Yeah. And again, the Zestworld staff has been extraordinary to me, and they've given a forum to like all these other younger creators too. I hope for their success, just because they are so well intentioned, and what they want to create for everyone is the world. What they're trying to do is create basically a more creator-friendly space. As the industry shifts, and we just lost Comixology, and rates are lowering in certain places, and we're all, I forget which companies have gone under, Money or whatever. Like everyone's, and the only way it seems to sometimes to make money in this business is to get a streaming deal on Netflix, right? Like, so everyone's. It's nice to work for a company that is thoughtful about its creators. They clearly want to make money too. I'm not saying that they don't, but they've been utterly generous to all of us.
Oh, we love to hear that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I can't believe it. Like, it's already been an hour since we've been talking.
I know. I'm actually working on my Zestworld stuff now. So when I hang up with you, I will hop right back on it.
Perfect. And then so next time we will dive into that a little bit more, because you'll have more done, and we can kind of talk about whatever. We're not going to say what we're going to talk about next time, because,
But I would love to. The process is really interesting. The one thing I want to say about Zestworld is they're scroll comics. So they're read down, top to bottom, as opposed to left to right or right to left.
Okay.
And so that's just a really interesting storytelling and composition challenge. I actually love it.
Okay.
Because it's like scrolling through Instagram, but it's definitely, you tell stories down as opposed to across. And that's very interesting.
And okay, now I have to ask though. So as a creator, does that change things? Because you're not, or it doesn't really matter. Like, I don't know. For me, things matter, like order, and I'm such a pattern person. Like, does it change your storytelling, even though it shouldn't?
What I love about it is that it actually makes the storytelling, you have to fit it in the space of a phone. So I think it organizes it really well. So for a reader, they don't have to be like, well, do I read left to right now, or do I read top to bottom? Like, or like, what's this diagonal? Like, it just forces you just to design down. So I actually think it can be easier for readers.
Okay.
As long as the material is not too dense.
I see. Yes. Okay. Well, I look forward to it.
We'll talk more about that later.
We'll talk more about that later. And also now you have to come back, and now you're considered a regular. So, and I just always love having conversations with you, and, scheduling so we can just have time to catch up and all of it. So thank you so much, Phil, for having the conversation. Congrats again on all the awards and acclaim for the work. But, in all honesty, it's just nice to see you. So hopefully
it's really good to see you. Stay healthy.
Yes, I will. I'll do my best. Sorry. Until next time.
Be well. Take care.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.